Thank you, everybody. Really pleased to be here. So my presentation today is going to be a great summary, I think, for everything you've heard so far. Really focused, though, on this point that everyone's been making about the importance of the data. So as you think about data and AI is rooted in data. It's important. I was speaking with someone earlier and we said, researchers are not often AI specialists, but we are data specialists, right? We know data, we live with data, we breathe data, we create data, and so we should be foundational to everything going on in AI because we should be bringing our data expertise. So if you think about a tree, the roots are the data, and from the roots grow the tree, and you can get different trees based on the data that you're using. You can get really great trees and beautiful shade trees, and you can get sick trees, and you can get poison trees. It all depends on the data that you're using. And so think about data as the root of the AI tree that you're building or you're trying to work with. Because of that, it's critical at every intersection and every point in our AI journey. Right now in market research, we're using it for two things. Really broadly speaking, we're using it for data health and we're using it for data creation. In the data health area, we're using it to make our data that we have, our human data, and even some of our data sets that don't have humans in it, that have a bit of fraud in it, as Ted was talking about, we use it to clean that data up, to make it better, to make it purer, and we're using AI to do that. We're also using it, as some of the presentations we've just seen, to create data. So in the data health area, we're using it specifically for pattern detection. You can find patterns that tell you if people are real or if they're not, but also within the real data, you can use it to find patterns that you couldn't find before. We're also using it for segmentation and clustering, to create those segments quicker, better, faster. We're using it for Actually, I'm wearing bifocals, so if I go like this a little bit, I can see close here but far here, so I have to bend my head down a little bit. For matching participants to each other and to surveys, so some of your partners are probably already using AI to do matching within their routers and with their survey ecosystems. And then to find segments, and if this person qualified for the survey, based on my segmentation within my panel databases, this person will probably qualify as well. So they'll try to improve the traffic to a survey to improve conversion rate and participant experience. They're also using it to detect fraud, the language in the open ends, the style, the speed, looking at how fast they're going through screens, looking at how fast they're coming back from surveys, looking at the names, looking at repeat responses, looking at differences. They can use it very effectively. It's getting quite good at detecting fraud. And then we're using it to improve conversion and participant experience in some of that matching I mentioned to you. I'll do a PSA really quickly, specific to TED. We are actually talking about fraud quite a bit, and if you haven't been to globaldataquality.org, it's an association collaboration, Esomar, Insights Association, MRS, the Research Society, CRIC out of Canada, the Austrian Society, and more, all coming together to, as a community of associations and professionals and people who love this profession, to address this issue of data quality. Never more important than it is right now, because not only of the data that we're generating from real people and making sure that it's real, but also because of the implications, long-term, as Ted said, to our AI implications. In the data creation area, we're using it to actually create data. Synthetic data, as you've just heard about, actually taking a core data and using that to model up to get scale. But as we've talked about, if you only have 60 people and you create scale from 60 people, you're going to get 1,000 of those people that look like the 60 people. So you need to really make sure that you have good data for synthetic data. Segmentation, actually creating new segments, new sentiments, and coding schemes. We did a project for the Insights Association, and I'll say that one of those projects, we actually used a generative AI to create a code frame for us in our race ethnicity work. Now, we had to think about some things that I'll get to in just a moment as we did that. And then we're using it as a profession in trend data. We're actually creating content, creating ideas, creating things to test. Analytics and statistics, we're using it there, location-based data, and interpretive data. So we're using it to clean data and to create data. For either of those implications, there are 6 R's that we're talking about. So this is kind of a summary of the things that you've already heard from everyone, kind of put into one slide for you. The 6 R's of using AI and your considerations are the reason for use: the risk, the respondent care, representation, relevance, and reliability. Those last three are key really to like true data quality, but I'm going to touch on each of them. So your reason for use, why are you using it? This is super important. Because it has implications for the other 5 R's and what they might mean to your project. So are you using it simply to create efficiency, as we've heard about, or are you using it to create new content? And if you are using it to create new content, how good do you feel about the underlying data and who owns the IP? If you're using it for efficiency, are you using it well for efficiency in ways that make life easier for your teams, or are you using it in ways that will make their jobs actually harder, stifle creativity, and maybe have the implication of efficiency, but create longer-term problems on the effects on the humans that you're trying to bring efficiency to. So outlining, just like you're starting a new project, what are your objectives in starting the new project? You should outline those objectives in your reason for using AI. And then for each of those objectives, what are the implications for things you need to be concerned about? Risk is the first thing that you'll want to move to if you're thinking about the things you need to be concerned about. So there are a lot of risks in using AI of all kinds. There are legal risks and privacy risks. There are IP risks. There are risks of exposing your client's data. If you're using the most open form of ChatGPT 3.5, do you know that if it's not your data, you're probably breaching your NDAs? If you're using the newer forms of generative AI and you have a system in place to allow you to send that back and forth with encryption and with security, or you're using walled gardens within your own organization, that's great, but have you thought about cybersecurity? Have you thought about where you're putting all of this data and the risks that exist? Have you thought about the risks of the content that have been generated and whether you own them, whether the ChatGPT owns them, whether your client owns them, and what the overall ownership and IP ownership implications are? And then, there's other kinds of risks as well, legal risks, risks to humanity. At the end of the day, our job is to measure society. It's to represent society in the decision-making boardrooms. If, as a profession, we start risking our data and actually impacting society, we've really missed the bar. So we have to think about what we're doing with AI, and is it serving our purpose of measuring society, or are we making mistakes that are actually going to impact society in ways that we should not? That brings us to respondent care. Do your participants in research participants the right word, but it doesn't start with an R. So we're going to go with respondent care here. We're going back a little just so we can have our alliteration. Do they know how we're using their data? Are they fully informed? In the codes of today, it says that you should tell people how you're going to use the data and use it for that purpose and that purpose only, and then if you're going to use it for a different purpose, to let them know. In generative AI, where you're building these long-lasting data sets, how are you doing that? Do they know that you're keeping that data, using it for a training model? And while today you may be trying to use their data to tell whether or not they're going to buy the new brand of Pepsi, tomorrow you might be using those same ideas to help know who they're going to vote for. Did they know that you were going to do that? Were they aware? Did they permission your data in the right way? And if you're using it in that way, and you're helping companies generate content and videos and messaging schemes that will help sway a vote, is that going to be helpful or harmful to them individually, to their families, and to society as a whole? So you really have to think about the data that you're using, how you're going to use it, and whether or not you have permission to use it that way, and whether or not the participant would perceive that as good for them or harmful to them. Lots of respondent care considerations to be made here, and lots of codes that will be coming out in the very near future in this specific area because of our profession's responsibility to the duty of care. Representation, by the way, and no longer representativity, which is hard to say. Representation, how about that? Representation, we've changed the word a little bit. So in the representation area, so important, right? Some people would say that the most important thing we need to consider. What does the data set that you're working with represent? Do you even know? Can you even define it? And if you can define it, what does it represent? What does it not represent? And is it fit for purpose based on that representation? Are there biases in it that you're going to amplify? We've heard a lot about that today, so I won't spend too much more time on that. But relevance. There's a big part of relevance. Is the data that you are using relevant to the question that you are asking? It's it's a new word for fit for purpose, right? But is the data relevant? Is it fresh? Is it current? We've heard a lot about 2021. Can the data that you're using predict how people feel now on the other side of rapid inflation, on the other side of the war in Israel, on the other side of the war in the Ukraine, on the other side of a housing crisis, a pandemic? Those societies changing greatly. It's fractured in many ways. Is the data that you want to use for AI relevant to where we are today as a society? And not only that, can it actually predict these big intervening things that are going to happen, that are going to change how we feel even tomorrow? So if you've got something that's highly new, current, and you need something that's really going to predict out into the future, is the data relevant for that, or is it just the starting point and you need a lot of really good data from actual human beings to make that decision? And then finally, data reliability. If you do your research twice, you should be able to replicate it, right? If you do it the same way, in the same time frame, you should be able to get the same answer. That's not often true in AI right yet, especially if the underlying roots of the data are not as pure as you want them to be. And so reliability is really important, being able to replicate, being able to go to the decision makers in the room and say, this data is reliable for a $1 billion ad spend. And I can prove that to you because I can replicate it and it's actual humans. And so those kind of concepts are really important to who we are as researchers and professionals. And we have to keep them at the core of all of the work that we do. So if you think about those 6 R's, risk, respondent care, reliability, representation, I can't remember the other 2 now, but I'm going to just keep going. If you think about those 6, and you think about this consideration here about synthetic audiences, is the synthetic audience the way for you to go? Is it representative? Does it have representation? Does it have reliability? Does it have risk? Do you understand the respondent care? Do you really understand what you should be thinking about in terms of synthetic audiences? And we're going to talk about that during our roundtable. That'll be one of the topics of our roundtable on data quality, is a use case of synthetic data. And the second is, if you're thinking about open-end coding. If I take my open-ends and I drop them in to be coded because I want to speed that process up, where am I dropping them? Am I dropping them into a frame that breaks my NDAs, or is it a private walled garden? Once I put it there, who owns it? What's it used for? If it's my client's open-ends, and I use it going forward to train my data set, do I have permission to do that? If the codes coming out of it are good, or are they based on other data that is not quite equivalent, am I going to apply a human to it? So this is the other open-ended coding case, and we're going to look at the 6 R's in a couple of different case studies and think about those 6 R's as we frame our decision for whether or not AI is the right solution. And even if it is the right solution, what are the risks and steps that I need to take as a researcher to implement it properly? So I would close with much to be excited about. As associations, we truly believe in the future of AI. We're not in any way trying to stand as a guardian against it. We're trying to move the profession forward in a way that is risk-embracing, but also risk-aware, but much to do. We have a lot to do in this area, and we're excited to partner with all of our members on doing that. The end.